Rabbi Viñas was born in the late 1960s in Miami to an Anusim family who had emigrated to Florida soon after the Cuban Revolution. His family officially returned to Judaism while he was a youngster, and his elementary and secondary education was in Sephardi yeshivot. Since 1989, he's been living in the New York metropolitan area, studying at Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary of Yeshiva University. He received his degree to be a sofer. His Orthodox rabbinical ordination are from Kollel Agudat Achim and Yeshiva Ve'Kollel Zikron Hikazario Yokel, both in Borough Park. Currently, he's simultaneously studying at Kollel Agudat Achim for ordination as a dayan for an Orthodox Beit Din, and for his doctorate in Jewish Studies at the Spertus Institute of Jewish Learning and Leadership, Chicago, Illinois. His secular degrees are a BA magna cum laude in Psychology and Social Science from Touro College, and an MSW CSW with honors in psychodynamics from Hunter College. He teaches courses in CCNY's Jewish Studies program and is a Jewish chaplain for the Yonkers Police Department. Besides being the rabbi of Lincoln Park Jewish Center in Yonkers, he created and leads El Centro de Estudios Judeos Torat Emet, an international organization which has the mission of aiding Anusim to return to Judaism.
What does he do on his time off?
Got married.
That's not on the bio.
Did a lot of research, putting things together.
But you didn't say he just got married in July.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
My wife Sandra is right there.
Please stand up.
She's probably answering all of these questions on Facebook. We have a very large, I'll use the Spanish-Portuguese term that the Spanish-Portuguese Jewish community uses. We have a very large ministry in Spanish that goes out internationally. And Sandra and I occasionally send her a Facebook message just to make sure that we still know each other. We spend a lot of time on Facebook. And I'm going to give you a kind of a little introduction to that, and I have some other sheets of paper that I want you to take with you. I wouldn't want you to leave with your hands empty. I want you to have something from me. Let me give you a little bit of a background regarding my, thank you by the way for inviting me. I'm very grateful. Elaine has been after me for a while to get me to, yeah, she's been after me for a while to get me to come, and because of all the busyness, sometimes it's difficult to make a commitment to coming, but I really want you to, I want to thank you for your persistence and for having me come. It's really a great pleasure to be with you. My family is from Cuba. The joke about Cuban Jews is that we're Jubans. And my wife is a Juminican.
Yeah.
Juminican.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's a very normal marriage, Juban and a Juminican.
Yeah.
The family background that I'm coming from, Elaine listed for you some of the places that I have smicha from. Primarily, I worked for a long time as a sofer, as a scribe, and repaired a lot of older Torahs. I'll confess to you that when I was a child, I was the kid who used to be able to forge my parents' signature absolutely perfectly. So I figured maybe I should turn it for the good, and now I can actually copy the existing handwriting on other Sifrei Torah, so that if I replace sections of a Sefer Torah, one of the greatest compliments I ever got was a very old Spanish-Portuguese Torah from the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue on Central Park West, and I turned back the work, and Rabbi Angel looked at the work and said, well, what do you mean, you didn't do anything? I said, well, that's a very nice compliment, but I have before and after pictures, of course, it comes with my bill. But so as a scribe, I have some training in identifying different styles of writing from different countries. That really was an opening to what became a really interesting odyssey for me, and I want to share it with you. I was the rabbi, Jewish educator at a JCC in Tarrytown, New York, and I had just taken the position of being the Jewish educator there. I was doing exciting things like telling midrashic stories in the gym while people were on the treadmill. And I get a call from a gentleman who says, "Rabbi, you won't believe the story I've got to tell you." I said, "Well, try me. He says, "Well, he is a banana, he buys bananas in Honduras. He was in Tegucigalpa. Hurricane Mitch had struck Tegucigalpa, and he couldn't leave through Tegucigalpa, through the capital of Honduras, Honduras for the English speaking, and he drove all the way out to San Pedro Sula, which is on the border. He was getting an airplane, and a man comes over, and he says, 'Excuse me, are you Jewish?' And the man says, 'Yes, I'm Jewish.' He says, 'I have something for you that I need you to do for me.' He says, 'What is it?' Total stranger. He says, 'Take this.' He gives him a Torah scroll that was damaged in Hurricane Mitch. And he says, 'There's a rabbi in New York. Give it to him. He'll find a way to fix it.' Now, of course, what I found out was the total stranger gives him the Torah. He lands in Long Island, calls me and says, 'Here it is.' What happened? The synagogue in Honduras was struck by Hurricane Mitch. Everything was lost, except they had 2 Sifrei Torah. One of those Sifrei Torah survived the hurricane. It was filled with mud. I began to repair this Torah with people from the JCC in Tarrytown. We opened it, we dried it, we went with scalpels, we took out all the mud, we started replacing all of the letters. It was an educational process, and there was a lot of press, and I began to get calls. The press covered it in a wire service, and I began to get calls from all over the United States of Spanish-speaking people who realized that I was a Latino, that I spoke Spanish, and that had been desperately seeking a way to come home to Judaism. Many of these people had gone to all the different denominations of Judaism. They were met primarily with suspicion. And the reason is because what they shared with me was, they said, "Rabbi, you won't believe it." Everybody always starts conversation with me, "You won't believe it." I believe it. So they said to me, "You won't believe it, but we are descendants of crypto-Jews. My family, we remember Jewish customs that our family did, and now we've gotten to understand more, and we want to formalize a return to Judaism." Well, the first thing that people tell me this, and we're not talking about a small number of people. First thing that I responded to them was, number one, I believe you. Number two, I'm just like you. Number three, we want you back. We want you to come home. And so I began an entire ministry in Spanish called El Centro de Estudios Judíos, the Center for Jewish Studies, Torah Temet. I want to share with you why we named it in Hebrew Torah Temet, which means the real Torah or honest Torah or Torah is the truth, depending on how you read it. The reason is because before the Jewish community, the formal Jewish community, in any denomination, began recognizing the crypto-Jewish reality, the fact that there are millions of people in this hemisphere that are descendants of Jews who were forced to convert to Christianity, to Catholicism, because of the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisitions, and in fact, that the Americas were settled because of the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisition, where Jews were seeking refuge in this part of the world. before we, the Jewish community, recognized that phenomenon, the Jews for Jesus and other messianic groups realized that that was the case. They have opened up churches throughout Central and South America and the Caribbean that are specifically targeting people who have an ancestral Jewish memory. And what they don't understand, Jews, of course, are very upset by these movements of these messianic Christians. But what they don't understand is that, for example, they'll put out a shingle, they'll put out a poster, and they'll say, oh, we're going to give a Seder. And these born-again Christians will come to the Seder, and they'll watch the Seder, and they'll say, hey, wait a minute. We know some of these rituals. And so they begin an entire system of attachment through Messianic Christianity, and slowly but surely, they become more and more aware of Jewish practices, and slowly but surely they're returning to Judaism. And so, where other rabbis, I have to say it, where other rabbis are very upset about the Hebrew Christians and the Jews for Jesus, you need to understand, they work for me. They're basically helping the people who want to learn more about Judaism but have no access to Judaism because synagogues all over the world are meeting them with suspicion. They're opening their doors and they're giving them an opportunity to learn a little more. They're transitioning towards Judaism. What I would like to propose is that we say to them, you learned enough? Now come. Now come join us. And so when I said to them, we want you back, we want you to come home, always greeted with tears. I'll share with you something about tears. I performed 16 return rituals. I'll explain what that is in a moment. 16 return rituals in one family, in one Dominican family. In that family, a patriarch of that family, was living in Union, New Jersey, had moved from Dominican Republic, was living here, and had firmly established himself and his home already as a Jewish home. He had a niece in Dominican Republic who was not in direct contact with him, but was writing to me through the internet and had decided to travel to New York to visit her uncle and to finally tell him about her attraction to Judaism. She didn't know anything about it. She didn't know he was into it. And she was very, very nervous, and she went to see him. She arrived at his door, and she saw the mezuzah. She knocked on the door, and this Dominican man comes to receive his niece, and they both started to cry. Because what she was going to share with him was something that he already had come to the conclusion. And so I'm beginning to see that there's some sort of a clarion call that has formed here, where entire families are being called to return to Judaism. More on that later. Let me share with you my personal background. My parents came to the United States after the Cuban Communist Revolution. My father, it's a very American story, my father arrived in Miami with $27. $27. Nothing. No family, nobody to receive him. He began to work. He worked first as a busboy, then as a short order chef, and worked his way through. My parents had met through members of the family who made an arrangement that they should marry. They came to the United States, they worked hard. My sister, Alava Shalom, was born, the first child, and they were here as refugees. They hardly spoke English. They were working in factories and trying to make do. My sister was very sick, and they began to go to doctors. And finally, a doctor diagnosed the illness, and it was leukemia. 5-year-old child. Hardly spoke English. Great troubles. Great troubles. My father tells me the story that he began to go to many different synagogues and many different churches, really, and then went to these churches, didn't feel right. One Saturday morning, he was desperate. He said he didn't know what to do with himself. His child is dying. Very sick child. And so what he would do when he got desperate is that he would get in the car and just drive around. It seems the driving around would give him some relief. So he's in traffic on Southwood A Street in Miami, and there's a detour, there's an accident in front of him, and there's a detour to a side street. Obviously God made a detour. He takes the detour, he passes 9 a.m. Saturday morning, a synagogue. And he sees people driving in and parking. And he said, I've never been to that kind of a church. Let me go in there. Maybe I'll find relief there. Walks into this church, hardly speaks English. And thank God, the members of that synagogue realized he's somebody who has trouble, somebody who's suffering, and they welcomed him. Started going back. And he realized more and more that the customs that this place practiced were the customs that he had seen his grandmother in Cuba performing. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the grandmothers. My grandmother on my mother's side, one of my earliest memories that I have is when my grandmother told me that in our family, it was, even though we were Christians, we're Catholic, it was forbidden to confess a true confession to the priest. We were not permitted in our family to ever pray to any of the saints. We were not permitted to bow down in front of a statue. We were only to pray to what my family called El Dios, the God. Now, years later, I find out that in Ladino, the name for God is El Dios. But in Spanish, it's El Dios, with an S. But, we leave off the last S for savings, like the, 1-800 mattress. So the idea was to not create an understanding that perhaps there would be multiple gods. It was El Dios. So we began to piece back. My father tells the story that he came home one day and he said to my mother, of blessed memory, said to her, in America people do things that we only did in secret. And she says, what are you talking about? Oh, I saw somebody lighting candles like my grandmother lit candles. The family lived in Pinar del Rio. It's a region that was a underdeveloped region. It was a coal mining area. It was such a poor town that they did not have a church. When they went to church, they had to travel to the church. They also had private cemeteries, and those private cemeteries would only be burials by family members, and the priests were never involved in the burials. They were marrying certain members of families, and other members they didn't marry. I had an aunt that was so observant, so religious Catholic, that every Holy Week, she gave all of her bread and cakes to the poor.
Passover.
So they didn't mix milk and meat. My family believed that it was against our health, bad for our health, to eat pork. So they avoided pork. And we had a relative who said, come on, this is Narishkeit. Well, he didn't say that in Yiddish. This is foolishness. And then he started eating pork and he had a heart attack. So everybody proved that that was against our family values. So finally, so slowly but surely, the family began to learn more about Judaism. And we converted to Judaism 4 times. And each one of these conversions was because on some occasions, we had one guy who would come and say, oh yes, we're going to convert you to Judaism, and then it'll only cost you X number of dollars, and then you had to pay the guy, and then he finally welcomed you, and then he gave you like, you know, you're officially Jewish, and then he gave you like a piece of paper. It was fraud. But they were taking advantage, and it's happening more and more, they're taking advantage of the fact that many converts that come forward are greeted with suspicion. And they suspect a number of things. I'll tell you what they are. He just wants to get married to a Jewish girl. He's doing it for money. Or he's a little crazy. He's a little nuts. And what really is going on is that this movement, because of the internet, is growing by leaps and bounds. And the organized rabbinates of many of the countries of Latin America are doing everything they can to block it from growing. And there are a number of reasons why. Primarily, it's racism. The second reason, racism. And the third reason, socioeconomic.
Israel, they don't want
You
them
thought I was
to
going to say
leave.
racism, but
They don't want them to leave, because every time Jews were invited to those countries, it was only because those governments thought that we would be good for their economy.
that's not the reason. I've spoken, it's a rational, what you're saying is rational, but that's not the reason. I've spoken to a number of rabbis, and by the way, I wish I could say it was one denomination. If I could say, well, I could blame it on the Orthodox, I can't. It's throughout the system. I've spoken to a number of rabbis. Primarily, the reason that they give me is that synagogues all over Latin America were primarily organized to make sure that Jews married Jews. So they're very nervous about these people coming in, overwhelming. In one country, I spoke with somebody, and they said, well, these people are more religious than we are.
Yeah.
They'll come in every Shabbos, and they'll take over the whole shul.
Right.
And they would, by the way, I want you to know. I mean, they would come in mass. They would be regulars. Right? So they have a problem with that, and this is part of the culture, part of the problem. The other problem is another problem, and that is, if I start to analyze it from a Jewish legal point of view, which I'm going to do now, and that is that there is a misconception in Jewish thought, which has to be clarified. And that is, we keep repeating the same thing over and over again, and the more that you repeat it, the more everybody believes it's true. But it is not true. And that is that Jews do not proselytize. That is not a fact. The fact of the matter is that the Jewish religion was a missionary religion. We sent missions, and not only did we send out missions to the Greeks and to the Romans and to all the rest of our neighbors, but we even did forced conversions to the Idumeans and many other people. So we were a very active community seeking conversion.
How long ago was this? I'm sorry.
When Emperor Hadrian, it stops at Emperor Hadrian. Hadrian creates a persecution against Romans who convert to Judaism, and he says that it will be death penalty for those who convert to Judaism and for the rabbi who converts them. Now we could use the day off. But the rest. But basically, so therefore, the Jewish community said, we're not going to proselytize. But that's proselytizing to non-Jews. But the Anusim community are not non-Jews. And as this grew, an entire genre spins off, trying to say, well, when somebody comes forward to convert, we should dissuade them. They didn't read the rest of the text. The text in the Talmud doesn't say dissuade them. The text of the Talmud says make it clear to them that they're about to enter and become part of a community that is oppressed and discriminated against. And then it says, you know this, then it says, and if they insist on coming anyways, then we greet them and we receive them. But what's going on is that over the years, and now it's centuries, we've developed an entire suspicion of people who wish to convert. And we keep on putting them through these tests and all of these things to see, well, are they going to stay? Are they real? What is their real intention? Well, perhaps when they come and they tell us, my intention is to come close to the Torah and to be part of the Jewish people, maybe we should believe them. Especially today when they don't have any ulterior, they have no reason for it. Then we have the suspicion, well, they just want to get married, they want to get they want to marry a Jew. Friends, we're at a 70% intermarriage rate. What if we gained one instead of lost one? I mean, right? So, and by the way, the Talmud says very clearly that if a person, it says it in Yevamot, that if a person were to come to convert solely for the sake of marriage, we shouldn't encourage it, but once it's done, it's accepted. So certainly that was an acceptable reason for conversion. People were doing it. But those are really converts. There's another body of halakha, another body of law that applies specifically to crypto Jews. Let me explain where it starts. Rabbeinu Gershom, very famous for the ban on polygamy, created a large number of takanot, rabbinic decrees. Many of them involved the issues of marriage and family life. Another one of his takanot, rather interesting takana, you're not allowed to read each other's mail. One of his takanot is that when somebody of Anusim background wishes to return to Judaism, that we should seek them out, that we should try to draw them with love, and that we should not turn them away ever in order to bring them home. Why? Because Rabbeinu Gershom was alive after the Crusades, and one of his sons had been forcibly converted to Christianity and died and was buried in a Christian cemetery. So Rabbeinu Gershom wanted to promote that people who were descendants and who were forced to convert to another religion, he calls them not apostates, he calls them Anusim. Anusim means that they didn't give up Judaism of their own free will, they gave up Judaism because they were forced. Anus means to be forced. Forms an entire body in Jewish law among the Sephardim, especially in Holland, where large numbers of people, over hundreds of years after the expulsion in 1492, started to slowly go to Holland to seek freedom, and into the 1650s and the 1770s, there were still Jews that were leaving Spain and Portugal. This is historically documented. That were leaving Spain and Portugal, that were seeking to return to Judaism. And the rabbinate of Holland created a system where they would be returned to Judaism. So they didn't consider it a conversion, they considered it a reversion to Judaism. And what did that require? It required that the candidate, the person who was returning to Judaism, state to the court, to a rabbinic court, that he or she believes in the Torah, that he or she believes in Judaism and rejects any other religion. If it was a male, that he be circumcised. If it was a woman or a man, that they go to the mikveh. But they were not dissuaded, they were encouraged. And there were large numbers of these, including many rabbis, people who became rabbis. There was so famous, Menashe ben Israel. He was so famous that Rembrandt actually painted a picture of him, painted a painting of him. Rembrandt painted Menashe ben Israel. Menashe ben Israel came with his family to Holland when he was 16 years old, had himself circumcised in 1650s. That's no fun. Had himself circumcised, studied Judaism, became a rabbi alongside of his very good friend, Abu Abda Fonseca. Abu Abda Fonseca was a descendant of Portuguese Jews who had finally been able to move some of their money through the banking houses of Hamburg into Holland. Also had himself circumcised. Abu Abda Fonseca became such a genius in Jewish law that 4 synagogues merged and accepted him as the rabbi in Holland. in one of the wealthiest Jewish communities in the world. After a period of time, Abu Abda Fonseca and his friend Menashe ben Israel begin to write an entire library of books specifically targeting the Anusim of the world, written in Spanish and Portuguese, intending to help them transition back to Judaism. One of them, El Mesías de Israel, the Messiah of Israel, clarifying that Jesus was not the Messiah, and the belief of the Jewish people regarding the Messiah, helping people return to Judaism. Another was called El Conciliador, where it's a tremendous work by Menashe ben Israel, where he attempts to reconcile verses from the Torah that contradict each other, that appear to contradict each other. Abu Abda Fonseca leaves Holland in the 1650s and settles in Brazil, in Recife, in Brazil, opens up a synagogue called Sur Yisrael, Kahal Sur Yisrael. That was in a synagogue, a Spanish and Portuguese synagogue, specifically to target the Jews, the people of crypto-Jewish background that were all over the Americas, with missionaries that went throughout Latin America to specifically attract the Jews back. Let me share with you why. Are you familiar with the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law? Rabbi Yosef Karo. Everybody knows Rabbi Yosef Karo. He's a good friend of ours. He wrote this Code of Jewish Law. But they don't know who his Rebbe was. Rav Yaakov Barab was his Rebbe. Both the teacher of Rav Yosef Karo and Rav Yosef Karo were part of a group of Spanish and Portuguese expatriates that had settled in the northern part of Israel, in Tzfat, in the area of Tzfat. That was the Kabbalistic circle that wrote the Kabbalat Shabbat, that wrote most of what we know of today as Kabbalah. It included the Ari, it included the Ramchal, it included many of the writers of Kabbalah. Rav Yaakov Barab tried to promote a movement where he wanted to reinstate the smicha, the ordination of the lineage of Moses. And what he said was, look, the Romans came into the land of Israel and they tortured and killed every rabbi that was ordained in the lineage of Moses. We've lost the ordination of the lineage of Moses. He quotes Maimonides and he says, if 70 rabbis, what we call rabbis today, if 70 rabbis would ordain one rabbi, he could then ordain 70 rabbis and they could reconstitute the Sanhedrin. What did he want? He wanted the Messiah to come. And what he said was that if the Sanhedrin would receive the Anusim, punish them with symbolic lashes for having accepted a false god, and declared them, having returned to Judaism, that the Messiah would come. Let me share with you why. Because according to Rav Yaakov Barab and many of the Mekubalim of Spain, what will cause the ultimate redemption is the return of the crypto-Jews of Spain and Portugal to Judaism, and the desire of the Jewish people to receive them. And they equate it to the exile of the Shekhinah, in Kabbalistic terms, where the feminine presence of God has been captured by the evil side, and her energy is being sucked away by the evil side, and the only way to redeem her would be for the Jewish people, who was encapsulated as symbolically as her husband, to desire her and redeem her. So according to these Mekubalim, the crypto-Jews would be the embodiment of the Shekhinah, and the only way to bring the Messiah, to finish the redemption, would be to bring them back to Judaism. That plays into another one of these recurring themes within the crypto-Jewish community. Let me share it with you. I want you to take this one home with you. Yeah, I don't want to sound too much like a professor. I'm sorry. I have a brother whose name is Jose. and I have a sister whose name is Esther. And wherever I've gone, and I have visited a large number of crypto-Jewish communities all over Latin America, one of the recurring themes that runs through the families of Anusim is that there are always people in the family called Jose and Esther. And I want to share with you why.
Joshua.
Think about it. One of the most beautiful, no, it's not Joshua, it's Jose. Jose is Joseph.
Yes,
One of the most beautiful stories
Yeah,
in the Torah
yes,
is when Joseph is in Egypt and he dons the clothing of the pharaohs. And his brothers come into Egypt and they don't know he's Jewish because he's disguised as an Egyptian. And then it's one of the most beautiful scenes in the whole Torah. What happens? Finally he comes out to them and he says, I'm Joseph, your brother. And they love him and they have a reunion. And then Joseph takes all of the power that he had accumulated in Egypt and he uses it in service to his brothers. In a similar way, Esther was also a crypto-Jew. Esther disguises herself. This is why we wear masks on Purim. Esther disguises herself as a non-Jewish queen. She uses a non-Jewish name. Her name Esther that's not her name. Right? So what's she doing? What is she doing? She's taking this name to disguise herself as a non-Jew, and now she's going to take all the power that was accumulated in this persona, which was a false persona, and she's going to reveal it. She finally reveals it, and with that revelation, she saves the Jewish people. So the dream of the Anusim, my family, the people I serve, is not only to come home, but it's also that our return should help you. If you think about it, it's a very powerful idea. What if I told you that we have millions of friends in every country in Latin America that pray for us every day, that hope that they can come home, be part of us, and that will do everything possible to in some way help the Jewish people and the land of Israel prosper? Wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be intelligent of us to recognize them like Joseph, like our brothers, and have a reunion of the family? And if tell people, if you want to understand, I want to communicate to my children, to my students, the glory of the Jewish people. I tell them all the stories of everything we've overcome. Shouldn't we add the story of a whole bunch of people who had to run to the jungles of South America, where the most powerful government in the world at the time, Spain and Portugal, Philip II was one of the most cruel inquisitors, went out there to find us. They went all the way out to the Philippines to torture Jews. And we survived anyways. And hundreds of years later, there's something so delicious, and I say it, something so delicious about living a Jewish life that we still remember it and desire it. Wow, what would your grandchildren say if they knew that there's a whole bunch of people who are love Judaism so much that they would travel anywhere in the world to try to get to it? That they would spend their last dollar getting online to get classes? That they would accept all kinds of humiliation in all different Jewish communities to try to return to Judaism? That's a great story. That's a story that has to be told about the Jewish people. You understand what I mean? I went from professor to preacher. But I hope you understand what I'm sharing with you, because to me this is the great passion. And so we began a whole series of classes. I'm going to give you all this material, a whole series of classes on the internet. Some of those were classes that have 13,000 hits. I have a channel on YouTube, and in fact tonight I'm giving a class also over the internet. We have hundreds of students who gather behind one terminal We have a group in Oaxaca, Mexico, that is gathering tonight. One computer. They're going to sit together and they learn together. And they interact with me. We have an interactive platform. We discuss Torah. Some of it is questions. There are quite a number of people that there are all kinds of fraudulent rabbis out there that are trying to get money from them and do all of these kinds of things. The Rabbanut won't recognize them. There are all kinds of difficulties that they're doing, but they're still continuing to do this. So let me share with you what I've come in contact with. I think I could be conservative in sharing with you that there is a very large community of Anusim in Mexico, specifically in the capital, in the area of the capital, in Venta Prieta, in Polanco, in Oaxaca. I know of a community in Guatemala that I've interacted with. This community in Guatemala was accepted after a tremendous amount of pressure from me and others in the community that actually went into the main synagogue of Guatemala, have become members and integrated within the Guatemalan Jewish community. There's a group in Honduras. There's a very large synagogue in El Salvador. We finished a mikveh in the synagogue of El Salvador. It is very large. That community probably has 150 families that come from all over El Salvador to the capital every Shabbat. They have bought an armory, an old armory. You imagine the size of that. And what they do is they set up small tents and they stay there for Shabbat and they all cook together on Friday. I was there, I visited with them. That is a growing community. On the outskirts of the capital in El Salvador, there is another group that is formed, which is another very poor group, but very active, primarily young people. There are about 25 young families that are part of that circle. It's a group of people. When I was in the capital, I shared with them, I told them I was going to go visit them on a Sunday morning. I call them all of a sudden, I say, I'm coming, I'm here. Wait, give us 20 minutes. They're out in their fields farming. They run to the shul. I come through a dirt road. They're outside. They see the rabbi. They start to sing and dance. The president, who is 28 years old, gives me the keys to the synagogue. Says, Rabbi, this is your synagogue. And what's the synagogue? I walk in there. These young men bought the slope on the shady side of a mountain where nobody farms. They filled it in with a retaining wall, and they built a stucco building. The floor is made out of pallets, and the benches is made out of wooden pallets. Very poor synagogue. Tremendous spirit. Tremendous spirit. Another group that I visited in Ecuador is very well organized in Quito. And there are throughout Ecuador, in Ambato and different communities, there are many different organizations. My wife is from Santiago in Dominican Republic, where I've done extensive work with Jews returning to Judaism in Dominican Republic. It's growing throughout Latin America. The work is enormous. And what I'm trying to get people to understand is that the return of the Anusim is not like conversions, mass conversions to Judaism. It's more like a coming home. It's not a conversion, it's a reversion. It's a recognition of those. And I'll open up the floor in a second for questions, but there's a promise in the book of Malachi. The prophet Malachi says that right before the coming of Mashiach, Elijah the prophet will come back, and there'll be a trumpet, there'll be the shofar. That's why we say, Tekad shofar gadol cherutenu, sound the great trumpet of our redemption. And this trumpet will sound, and it'll call everybody back to the land of Israel. I suspect that there's been a trumpet that is sounding. It's like a spiritual trumpet. And that hundreds of thousands of people are hearing it. And they're using the internet, which many people use to hide identities, as a continuation of this hidden identity, an exploration with Judaism, an engagement with Judaism, where they weren't able to do so before. They suddenly now have a platform. They're learning and they're growing. And the Jewish community is being very irresponsible because of the fact that we're not doing an outreach to them, because we're not welcoming them, because we have all kinds of hang-ups about welcoming converts. We're not understanding that it's really part of the mishpacha here, that it's part of the family. So we're not doing our part, and now we have a whole bunch of frauds and born-again Christians, pastors who suddenly ordain themselves as rabbis. There's a massive one, a Cuban guy who was called Dan Ben Avram. His real name was Daniel Hernandez. He changed his name, Hebraicized his name, created a false New Testament with a whole bunch of Hebrew things. It's like a matzah ball soup with a piece of chazer in it. And basically he has a huge ministry, doing this outreach. And when you talk to people who go to it, you know what they tell me? They said, we have no other remedy, Rabbi. We went to the synagogue, but the synagogue wouldn't welcome us. What do you answer them? They say, look, we're hungry. He offers us a little glass of water. We take it. So that's really the work. As much as possible, there are a number of us that are working within the background of the crypto Jews. By the way, there are a whole bunch of rabbis. I'm not going to out them today, but I've threatened them. I call those guys the crypto Jews. Those are the crypto Jews. So they are of crypto Jewish ancestry, but they won't admit that they're of crypto Jewish ancestry. So they do nothing to help their brothers because of the stigma of being a convert. Incredible. We had a couple of weeks ago, an Orthodox rabbi, finally, very powerful Orthodox rabbi, finally admitted that his mother had converted to Judaism and started to get involved in helping in the issues regarding conversion. But there's so much stigma about it. Because we have this craziness. Have you noticed this? I've noticed this. We have, on every Jewish website, there are certain words that jump out at you. It doesn't matter which ones you go to. They're always about preservation. We're preserving the customs of the Jewish people. Another one, authenticity. Everybody's got a hang-up about being authentic. Do you look Jewish? Are you Jewish? How do you know Jewish? What, you got papers? How is it? Right? The whole list of things, right? So everybody has to prove that they're authentic. Everybody has to prove that they're preserving something. They're like a museum piece. We're saving Judaism, we're preserving it. Every one of the denominations has proof that they're authentic and that they're this and that. With this authenticity problem, we're so suspicious when these people show up. Oh, the other thing I've had is, because of the authenticity thing, the other thing I've had is, oh, well, he doesn't look Jewish. Look, he looks like an Indian. He's got Maya. He's got Aztec blood. Oh, look, he's African. He's got some African blood. Friends, if you understand the history of Spanish and Portuguese settlements in the Americas, you need to understand why the Anusim would have Indian and African blood mixed in, because the enemy of my enemy, here's what it is. The Indians and the Africans were being colonized, were being brought as slaves, and were being colonized in the Americas by the Spaniards, who were the Christian Spaniards that were conquering here. If I came to America, if I went to Cuba, and I had a choice between marrying a Christian Spaniard or marrying an African slave, I had more in common with an African slave than I would with a Spanish Christian who sent ships over here to burn us at the stake. And we have records of that. The Spanish crown was doing everything possible to kill us.
That's true.
De las Casas wrote an eyewitness account, which unfortunately in American education is not read. Wrote an eyewitness account. He was a Catholic priest who wrote about the conquest of the Americas. And you read about the genocide that the church brought to the Americas. They did the same thing. They dug ditches and pushed the Indians after they had stolen all their gold and raped their women and given them diseases, pushed them into these things and killed them in mass graves. And you read this, it's very touching. But by the way, De las Casas says that it's not necessary to do that to the Indians because the Indians are very nice, they're very pleasant people, and they will certainly accept Christianity. But the Jews, they're very stubborn, those you can kill. He wrote a letter to the Queen. So our identity that has come into the Americas is part of the identity of the Western Hemisphere. This desire for freedom, this desire to be able to express ourselves, is very much the legado, the legacy of Spanish and Portuguese Jews that were seeking a place to run to. There's another very large community of Anusim here in the United States, in New Mexico and in Arizona. Those communities are because they are, if you want to understand it, you have to study Mexican history. By the way, Mexico, you should know, our Mexican neighbors, when you see a Mexican, remember this. One of the first countries in the world that gave religious freedom to Jews was Mexico. In 1920s, there was the Immigration Quota Act in the United States, where the United States did everything they could to block Ashkenazic Jews from coming to America. And Mexico announced that anybody who wanted to come was welcome in Mexico. A huge number of Jews went to live in Mexico, and then in the 1920s up to 1927, because of the United States Immigration Quota Act, they finally found a way through Mexico to come into the United States. But before that, the settlement of Nuevo León, which was the northern part of Mexico, was a completely Jewish area. In fact, the governor of that region was burned at the stake in the 1600s as a Judaizer for the sin of living Jewishly. So there's a whole history here that is very strongly supported. And so what I want to share with you is that there's vibrancy. There's an energy to it. It can help us. And I say to people, it isn't only that we're going to reach out to the Anusim to help them. The fact of the matter is that we should reach out to the Anusim in order to help ourselves. Because we have a problem in America. Mm-hmm. People don't want to come to our shuls because they're boring. Sorry, Rabbi. But there's a vibrancy. There's a vibrancy to these communities. That's not why in comparison. There's a vibrancy to these communities. They have gifts to bring us. Let's thrive together. Yeah? All right, so I'll take questions, and I'm gonna stop now. Yeah?
Please. Two questions. So one is, what role have Spanish and Portuguese rabbis from Spanish and Portuguese synagogues, like for example, Angel Senior or the Son?
Right.
How have these synagogues been allies or of yours?
Or not. Mm-hmm.
And the second is, what role has DNA played in helping to identify and bringing out people? And
Okay, we'll
has
be here
that
for
brought
tomorrow.
any more legitimacy to their status?
Excellent. Wonderful. Wonderful. I'll answer the first question first. There is now a growing recognition within the Spanish and Portuguese,
Take it.
and not only Rabbi Angel, there's a whole network of Spanish and Portuguese synagogues throughout the hemisphere, including in Europe, that it's the job of the Spanish and Portuguese community to bring home the Anusim. Admittedly, I have to share with you that it isn't the first time that the Spanish and Portuguese community did that. We did it in the 1650s. We did it in the 1780s. All of the synagogues in the Caribbean and in most of Latin America were organized during that period as a return of the Anusim. That's why they have names like Shereth Israel, Mikveh Israel, Nefutzei Israel, Nivchei Israel. They were all the desire of the remnants of the Jews returning to Judaism. Curacao, for example, has a sand floor, and the symbolism behind it was that when you wanted to enter the synagogue, you didn't want people to hear you walking in the synagogue. So there was a whole genre of organization around the Spanish and Portuguese return of the Jews to the crypto-Jews to Jewish life. It's been a little bit slow, but now the Spanish and Portuguese community is beginning to get active, and I believe it will stay with the Spanish and Portuguese community. Let me tell you why. I'll tell you why. You'll understand this. It's a Jewish politics problem. The more extreme positions among the denominations seem to be gaining strength. The extreme left is gaining strength, and the extreme right. And everybody in the middle has been left in the lurch. It explains what's going on within the conservative movement and the polarization within the conservative movement itself. The left orthodox drawing away from the traditional conservative, and the more reform drawing away from the egalitarian movements. That has been growing. Within the Sephardic world, something similar has happened, and that is the Haredization of the Sephardim. Shas has become like Lithuanian-style Sephardim, and the Mizrahi Sephardim have taken over. So the Western Sephardic culture is not being correctly represented or fully represented. And the Western Sephardic culture is very American, very assimilated. It's very European. It wants education. That's the reason why the JDS started at Shereth Israel. Right? So this now will give an opportunity, if these numbers are able to be included in the Spanish and Portuguese philosophy, it will give numbers to our philosophy. So I think it's very important. The second question is a very powerful question. The DNA analysis, both my wife and I, we did DNA analysis as well. Now, I have to tell you the truth. If I found out that I had proof that I was of Jewish ancestry, I would live a Jewish life. And if I found out that I didn't have that, I would live a Jewish life. And if the DNA said that I was a Olmec, I would live a Jewish life. I don't really care, you know. But I wanted to see what's there, what's under the hood. So it came out that we both did this DNA analysis. That seems to be something that is growing within the Anusim community. There's a Catholic priest, by the way.
Yeah, Santa Fe,
right? Right, who basically did the DNA, found out, yeah, he's Jewish, but he's still a Catholic priest, right? So there seems to be this conversation about the Jewish past. So Judaism may be in his past, but certainly isn't in his future. While somebody may not have a Jewish past, but they certainly will have a Jewish future. So that's kind of a conversation there. Aside from that, there seems to be a growing desire among Jews of Spanish and Portuguese ancestry to trace their roots. And there was a professor, she'll remain nameless because I have a bone to pick with her, but she wrote a whole thing about the growth within Latin America of the desire to track your Jewish ancestry as a way of rejecting your African and tribal past. And of course, I wrote her a couple of things, and we've been exchanging back and forth, but we're not done yet. So, but it seems to be that there's a historical connotation to this return as well, and certainly we see that Spain, the government of Spain, has extended to people who could prove their Sephardic lineage, Jewish or non-Jewish.
Portugal too.
Yeah, right, and Portugal also, citizenship, a recognition that we are descendants of those. So that's kind of that. Okay, I'll go on
I'm
this
not
one.
sure how to word this, but it may not even be relevant in the future whether or not Israel accepts this, because it's such a groundswell. I can feel what we're talking about. It's so huge. I think that they will have to pay attention to it. What do you think?
I originally,
even
your
matter.
question is awesome.
It probably doesn't even matter.
Your question is beautiful.
Gonna have
I'll
to-
share with you a personal story.
Okay.
My original intent, original, if I could dream my dream out loud, my original dream was to create a groundswell of support within the existing Jewish community and the structure of synagogues throughout the denominations. I'm not one of these people who says only one denomination. I have a broader picture of the entire Jewish people, which include African Jews, Asian Jews, Latin American Jews, and those who are not yet officially recognized as Jewish but really are Jewish.
The world is
So
one.
I understand that. But, and I imagined that the state of Israel would wish to have us come home. Unfortunately, that's not the thing. That's not what's happening. And if I were to spend, basically after many years of working on this, I said to myself, well, I have two choices. I could spend a whole bunch of time until I die, trying to get Jews to want the Anusim back.
Right.
Or I could just simply educate the Anusim and build a groundswell. I chose the second one. Because I'm not going to run away from that. I'll tell you another piece to this is that I believe that when I die, I'm going to go to heaven, and I'm going to have to give explanation. I'm not afraid of God. It's the old ladies in the family that I'm afraid of. So my great aunt will give me a slap in the face if I don't do what I'm supposed to do. My grandfather will say to me, how could you bring dishonor to the family by not recognizing your roots, your races? So I know that I'm going to have to render an account to them. So my real interest is to grow the number of people that have formalized return to Judaism, to create a body of rabbis and educators that would be working in those communities to create communities. And when that number is there, there's no way you can not recognize it.
Right, so I'm in
Yeah.
alignment with your thinking.
Yeah.
I totally believe in what you're doing.
And I suspect, by the way, that
It
after
won't
the
matter
numbers
what you
emerge, they'll love us.
Of course,
Right. Especially if they figure out where you're
because the
money.
integrity will be there.
Oh, by the way, that's the other thing. These people aren't poor.
Right,
These people are not poor. I have in the Dominican Republic an engineer, doctors, people tremendously educated that want to come home to Judaism. And I can't, look, Chavez, thank God he's dead, Chavez, right, of Venezuela,
Right.
brought and converted, and under the watch of the Jews, converted the Wayu Indians of Venezuela en masse, converted to Wahhabi Islam.
Bishop.
And so while Islam is promoting the growth of Islam in Latin America, we're turning people away from the synagogue. What kind of a suicidal plan is that? The few people who want to be our friends, we turn them away, and then Islam is growing all over Latin America? Doesn't make any sense. Yeah? Please.
Yeah, you mentioned that your wife is from Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
So my initial gut reaction was Sasua.
No,
No.
I'm
Right.
from the north area.
Yeah, well,
Santiago, in the middle of the country.
I understand. But I just thought the group here might find it fascinating hear about what Trujillo did during World War II
Mhm.
in Sosua.
Okay,
And I'm wondering what became of those Jews that he took in. You took in.
okay, so I'm gonna tell you, I have to tell you before I tell you that I teach presently at City College in the Jewish Studies Department, and before I met my wife, I was already teaching Dominican history. But now I understand it even better. Now I love Dominican history more. The story of Trujillo has taken over really the Jewish conversation of the Dominican Republic. The skeleton of the story is that at the Evian conference, where all of the world's leaders were gathered, and basically the Nazis wanted to show off that nobody wanted the Jews, including the United States, brought together all these world leaders at the Evian conference. The only one who got up and said, I will take 100,000 Jews, is Trujillo. Now, what actually turns out is that Jewish organizations, to our shame, did not cooperate with Trujillo, and about 800 Jews of European ancestry settled in the area of Sosua and took refuge in the Dominican Republic. Trujillo also not only did that, but he put his money where his mouth was. He gave them land, he gave them cows. They created the smoked meat and cheese products in the Dominican Republic. Those companies are still active. Many of them are cooperatives. That is that piece. But I want to share with you something that most people don't know about the Dominican Republic. The number, what always captured my imagination was, well, where did he get the 100,000? There's a much earlier president of the Dominican Republic whose name was Gregorio Luperón. Now, Gregorio Luperón had written a letter to the czars of Russia when the Jews were being forced into the Pale of Settlement. That letter, I believe, should be in the annals of human rights history. He basically castigates. Now, this is a president of a small country in the Caribbean. Imagine, nobody else said anything, right? He writes a letter and he says, that's not the proper way to treat human beings. He then reached out to a Jewish ambassador a Jewish man who was an ambassador of the Dominican Republic to France, and asked him, de Marchand, and asked him to do an outreach to the Alliance Universale, which was like the UJA Federation of Europe at that time, to try to get 100,000 Jews from the Pale of Settlement to move to the Dominican Republic.
What year was it?
In the 1800s. So basically, there's a very long history in the Dominican Republic, and earlier than that, we have letters from some of the presidents of the Dominican Republic recognizing the rights of Jews to live in the Dominican Republic. And, by the way, you should know that there was a president in the Dominican Republic who was of Jewish ancestry. So we have a very long history in the Dominican Republic. In fact, the Queen of Spain sent an inquisitor to the Dominican Republic to get rid of the Jews because she felt that that community was out of control in growth. So there's a very long history, but interestingly enough, the only one that seems to make it to the history is Sosua.
Why? Why is that?
Right? Because they're white. No, I mean, they're Ashkenazim. So when people think about Ashkenazic, when people think about Jewish communities, they think of the Holocaust and they think of European Jews. I used to not get any trinkets in the mail from the Jewish community. I always got rosaries because my last name is Viñas. But Goldberg, who he always gets Jewish material, right? He gets the Hanukkah candles from the Tel Yeshiva and all the rest of the, right? But Jews, by the way, the last names of the Anusim are typically Jewish. And those last names were specifically Spanish and Portuguese names. For example, Abreu,
Yeah.
right? The famous Abreu. What is Abreu? It's Hebreo. It's Hebrew, right? Curiel,
Brito.
many of those names, Brito, many of those names are really of Jewish ancestry. I'm trying to go around just if anybody...
Well, I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
I didn't finish. The question I was asking was, in the Dominican Republic, those few hundred filmers that did come, I was told were mostly male. So they didn't have Jewish women to marry. So what became of those Jews in Dominican Republic?
Many of them intermarried. Some of them moved afterwards into the United States. In the cemetery of the community in Sosua, which I've been to many times, you find a very interesting thing. There are tombs, double headstones, with the name of a man, Star of David, and then his wife next to him with no Star of David. No, they don't have crosses. You have to understand, the women who married them practiced Judaism. The first thing they built when they arrived in Sosua was a synagogue. We've been there. Very nice. It's a wooden synagogue. I was there for Shabbat. I conducted the services there, and it was just such an amazing experience to stand at the bima of this shul that's all made out of wood. That was the first thing they built. It's but yeah, they primarily became Creolized there in Dominican Republic.
Maybe your wife can write a book on all this Jewish history in Dominican Republic that we're not aware of.
Yeah, nobody
Yeah.
understands that.
She's writing down the
Yeah.
So I'll be waiting for you to write that book.
Okay.
Is it true that Fidel Castro has a Jewish roots and General Franco?
Mhm. General Franco has Jewish roots. Fidel Castro has Arab roots. Let me share with you the story of Fidel Castro. There is a very strong propaganda among American Jews, pardon me, it's my opinion as a scholar, a very strong propaganda to send millions of dollars in humanitarian aid to Cuba through the Jewish community. All kinds of trips to Cuba, UJA, all the federations, all the men's clubs, the B'nai B'rith, they send enormous amounts of money, medicines, toiletries to Cuba to support what at most is probably about 500 Jews in the entire island. What is being done with that is that the Cuban government takes all of that, repackages it, and sells it to the Cuban people. So it is another way of propping up a government that is oppressive to the people of Cuba. Unfortunately, well-meaning Jews in America, you have to understand, I'm going to forgive me for a moment for turning into a Cuban. Earlier I was a professor, then I became a preacher, now I'm turning into a Cuban, right? You don't export, I have bad news for Americans. The way you export democracy is not by having a whole bunch of 60-year-old fat Americans smoking cigars and Hawaiian shirts and drinking mojitos. That's not how you export democracy. The way you export democracy is that you hold a carrot ahead with a stick and you say, you want to trade with us, you want humanitarian trade with us, create a democracy. Give some human rights to people. Right now, it's a one-sided deal. Raul Castro has had the chutzpah to make demands on the United States. And the United States continues, we're gonna make all this. Ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. What the real story of Fidel Castro, and by the way, it's a trick in the Cuban machinery, of Marxist machinery. It's a trick to get people to say Fidel or Raul, because he wants to be on a first-name basis with us. I refuse to call him that. I call him Mr. Castro. So what Mr. Castro, Misters Castro, basically have done is that they've covered up the fact that they're really half-brothers. What really occurred in that family was, and by the way, one of his sisters had to leave Cuba because she was very much against him, Anita. Right? What occurred was that his father was a very wealthy Spaniard. He had a maid in the house who was of Lebanese descent. He impregnated, while he was married, that makes him a mamzer. He impregnated,
But she's not.
I'll tell you my favorite child. Anyways, so he impregnated the maid. Fidel Castro is the child of that union. He threw out his wife, and the maid took over the house. Now you understand the Marxist brain. So he's got all kinds of things that he's working out. I mean, I told you, I think Elaine said I have a master's degree in psychodynamics. I can give you a whole write-up on the guy's brain, right? Because of that. No, the ancestry is of Arabic ancestry. Now, the name Castro, there were a lot of people of Jewish ancestry with the last name Castro, and there were versions Crasto and Castro, but there were other people who were not. So it was one of these names like Smith, where you could have a Jew named Smith and you could have a non-Jew named Smith. So we can't prove that, but we do know that he has Lebanese ancestry on his mother's side. Okay? Yeah.
I have questions. One is, I think this is wonderful. It's been very informative, and I'm embracing the whole idea of Jews returning or coming back. But my question is, I just went to a lecture from the ADL, and my question is, how are the other countries responding to the increased Judaism, or people setting up synagogues, or expressing their
Most of the great question. Most of the communities are ignoring it.
Yeah.
They don't know it.
They don't know what's happening yet.
Right, they're
It
ignoring
hasn't
it.
become a problem.
So they're not going against it, they're not moving for it. They're mostly ignoring it. Yeah. I haven't seen any governmental pushback inside of those communities. The only place that we see growth in anti-Semitism is in Venezuela, with Chavez's regime and Maduro. You know how he claims that Chavez is communicating with him now? He claims there's a little bird. It's a true story. He claims that there's a little bird that flew into a chapel, flew around his head, and communicated Chavez's wishes from beyond the grave. And now Chavez is still ruling the government. I mean, but they did tremendous anti-Semitism and a growth against anti-Israel activities, specifically targeting the Jewish community. So that's been a real problem, only in Venezuela. But in the majority of the countries, there hasn't been much pushback.
My second question was just a quick one. What service did you use for your DNA? Because to check your DNA.
Oh, I use the inexpensive one, 23andMe.
Oh, okay.
But there are better
There's
ones.
a million of them.
There's a better one. There's one that is at Einstein Hospital,
Oh,
which we're going to do a little bit more extensive.
okay.
I do want to answer a question that Elaine sent me, and I thought it was a very thoughtful question, and that was, how do synagogues extend a hand to Anusim?
That was my answer.
That was an excellent
That was
answer.
what I wrote down.
I knew you were going to ask me that.
So I
I thought it was
have
but that was a very thoughtful question.
Yeah,
It means that you're open to it.
yeah.
So let me say this to you. My synagogue in Yonkers, I've had a lot of resistance from some, but others are more comfortable.
You're talking about Jews?
Jews that were in the community.
Yeah.
Just make them nervous. What do we, are they Jews, are these not Jews, what do we do? By the way, I have a letter from Aaron Soloveitchik, brother of Yosef Bear Soloveitchik, saying that the Anusim should be counted for the minyan. That's it. From the Brisk Rabbinical College of Chicago. And also, there is a responsa from Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu, I'll pass it around, talking about how to properly help Anusim return to Judaism, and that it should be considered as a return, not as a conversion. That was the former chief rabbi of Israel referring to that, so I'll just kind of pass that around. That's just to show you primary source material. What we've done is that I give out every week a written sermon, a short Torah thought, a short, 2 pages, but a short Torah thought in English, and I also translate it into Spanish. We've included some songs, En Eloheinu in Ladino. You've heard it? Yeah. What's that? Right. Non como nuestro Dios, non como nuestro Señor, non como nuestro Rey, non como nuestro Salvador. Mi Eloheinu, mi Eloheinu, mi Eloheinu, mi Moshienu. ¿Quién como nuestro Dios? Quien como nuestro Señor, quien como nuestro Rey. I'll write it for you. All right, anyways, there's others, things like that. They're on my website if you want to see
Yeah.
them. You can go to my Facebook page. I taped them.
I'm not sure.
There
I
are
think that
many
when you do that,
singers on YouTube.
somebody comes in,
Vanessa Paloma.
they share it. They're great.
Vanessa Paloma.
It's a slow
Yeah.
process.
She sings that song in, at the
We
same
were just,
time Arabic, Hebrew,
last
and Spanish.
Saturday, I mean, our rabbi
Because
was saying,
she's
yeah,
a
we need
Moroccan.
to change up our, the way we do things because it gets stale, and I think this would, I mean,
I think
are
it will
you
be
a
helpful.
traveling rabbi?
Not yet, they haven't kicked me out
Would
yet.
you come and sing?
They haven't kicked me out yet. Anybody else would like to?
I just have a comment to make that I have a friend in Los Angeles who's a conservative rabbi, and he has about 15 such families that are coming to him every Shabbat.
Yeah.
And the problem that he's facing now is that these people are very committed,
Yeah.
and the rest of his congregation is not. So this is what you described earlier, that the congregation is now worried that they're going to take over.
Is that interesting?
I want to join.
Yeah. And there's so many shuls that have a problem with apathy within the congregation.
Right, so if it wasn't for them, there would be
Nightmare of
nobody.
all nightmares. People are actually interested.
Right.
What do we do now? Right? They're coming. What do we do now? Yeah.
I want to join. Okay, I'd like to join. You get the joke.
Yeah, I got it.
But I had an idea. When you started singing, to put out a series of tapes in Ladino.
There are.
Jewish songs.
There are. Yeah.
Exist.
There are. I'm just going to say to you that if you wanted to do that, you could. My Facebook page,
I don't have
Página
Facebook.
Oficial of Rabino Viñas,
I don't have
has
Facebook. Can I go on the internet?
recordings. Yeah, you go on the internet. It has recordings on YouTube also. I have recordings of En Kelohenu, 2 different versions of En Kelohenu, and 3 different versions of Bendigamos. Bendigamos is a Spanish and Portuguese song that is done after the meal, so I have recordings there as well. All right, so I don't want to belabor this. I don't want to overstay my welcome.
Don't worry.
Right?
Because
I'm sorry.
I did research for another project I was involved in, some demographic research of the Staten Island, in context, El Centro de Inmigrante. And there's a lot of Mexican immigrants coming into the island in terms of the percentage of Hispanics we have in the island, and they come from rural Mexico. So if there are Anusim among these people, which is probably a high probability, how would our synagogue go about letting?
There are a number of ways to do it. One of the ways would be simply to put an ad in the paper in Spanish. Put an ad in the paper. Let people know you're welcome to come. You'd have to be ready to let people come and explore. You'd create a situation where people come and check it out. If they feel comfortable, they'll come back. They vote with their feet, as all Jews do.
Rabbi, maybe we can introduce 2 of those Mexican.
Get an
Anusim
ambassadors,
right
get
now.
ambassadors.
We have 2 of them
Tell
here
them
this
the story.
morning. Maybe we can hear their story.
You know, I'll share with you a story, what we did in Yonkers. It wasn't specifically to target attraction of Anusim, but I'll share with you, the Lincoln Park Jewish Center is based in a very large Irish community, and in Yonkers. And so what I did was, I actually did a festival celebrating Irish Jewish culture at my synagogue. And we had a movie, a documentary, called Shalom Ireland. And I had Irish step dancers for the program, and invited our neighbors just to come in so that we could create a friendlier situation. There is a beautiful, really, really good documentary called Tijuana Jews. And it's in English, and of course you'll hear the Spanish, they interview, and he's got caption. It's a Jew, a documentary filmmaker, who's a Jew from Mexico, from Tijuana, and it might be an interesting project for your entertainment and also for the larger community to put out an invitation regarding Jews in Mexico. I mean, that's just an idea, but the Tijuana movie is really, it's really great. It's really fun. It starts with "Oy vey!" and then it's like, you know, and he takes off from there, and it's really kind of really cool. Yeah. Yeah.
How can we get this movie? Is it?
It's very readily available. You'll just put it into the internet. It's Tijuana Jews. That's really a lot of fun. There's another one which is really good about the gauchos, of Argentina. It's called Los Gauchos Judíos. They were the Jewish cowboys of Argentina. That's really fun too. So if you did a series of presentations that would present Judaism from different perspectives, that would be something that I think might attract some people. Yeah? Anybody else? All right. Well, I just want to end with one thing. I want to thank you for inviting me. I want to thank you for your attention, and I want to ask for your help. Not for money. I'm not asking for money. I want to ask you for your help. What I've noticed is that we Jews talk a lot. No, we do. Share with one another. Share with people you know about this. What you could do, just spending time with your friends and family, sharing ideas with them, no lecturer could do in 4 walls. If you share your openness and say, hey, I heard about this, let's look at this more, this is a wonderful story. If you share this idea, it will create another way of thinking. If American Jews, if you're living in Staten Island, and one of the largest populations, growing populations in Staten Island, are Mexicans, wouldn't it be great if the Jewish community became the one who told the story? What if we had an ancestral memory and said, hey, when we were in trouble, Mexico was kind to us. Now they're in trouble. One kindness brings another kindness. You see what I mean? So if we would share our comfort with the Latin American community, our history, our shared history, we could create bonds of friendship that would be of benefit to them, would be of benefit to us. Yeah? So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.